So let's talk about how do I know if my print service provider or if I happen to have a printer at my site is working the way I thought. In other words, if I send it all this great information that we just talked about, how do I know I'm going to get what I asked for? Well, the GWG has created some output test suites. So let's look at them, just to quickly go through them here. So remember how we were talking about there's different flavors of output intent. You know, you can talk about what your source profile is, what your, you know, if you're using device gray like we talked about. And then what you can do is you can say, okay, here's my object with my profile. If it comes out through the rip and looks like what I sent in, you'll see just exactly what you like, which is the top row. If it goes through and it comes out with little X's in it, then you know that the DFE is not interpreting what you put in properly. And you can then start troubleshooting and trying to figure it out. So we're going to go through a series of test suites here, but you can see right here, the top row is what I expect. The bottom row is what came out of my rip when I ran it through. And if it has an X in it, that means it didn't come out the way you thought it was going to come out.
And so Steve, just as a note here, let's go back, going back to what we talked about before in terms of Acrobat, or the individual operating systems that you're working with. If you open up these test suites, depending on how you view them, you may see below, and it may not be, it may just be settings. So correct. I think it's very important. There are instructions that come along with them.
And then the other thing that's key here is what Dave just said. You can't count on when you view these things in a software emulation tool on your screen, such as Acrobat, or if you're using some of the prepress tools like, you know, from ESCO or Hybrid or Delim. You can't assume that what you're seeing on the screen matches what's going to happen on your DFE. Those are software emulators. They are not rips, especially Acrobat. Acrobat is not a rip, so just be careful. So if you, again, here's a bunch of tests for Cmyk, and you can see the idea here. You know, you've got lots of different shadings, which are transparency or blend modes, and you can easily detect if what you're building in your design file using PDFX4 is going to come out right. So this is leaving native transparency in the file and having your DFE interpret that native transparency and come out the other end with what you thought you were going to get. So these are great test suites for looking at whether or not your RIP or your DFE is going to interpret the instructions you just put in your output settings.
Absolutely.
So the same thing with spots. Spots gets even more complex because in PDF 1.0, which is all the way up through PDF X4 and some X5, that's not used that commonly. Everything was based on PDF 1.0. PDF 2.0 has a lot better controls for using spots with your Cmyk. So like Dave said, that's a future state. There's a lot of work being done right now to provide testing for that. So when we're talking about Cmyk plus spots or just spot processes, the tests are very complex, as well as your settings can be complex, because there is a lot of interpretation that happens. You know, a lot of people call it magic. It's really not magic, but it's a lot of nebulous instructions that are not common for the layman to use. So it's important, if you're using spots with your colors, to make sure you test them and don't assume they're going to be okay only because of the way they interpret when it goes through a DFE is very subject to the manufacturer's interpretation of the PDF specification. You know, and we're not endorsing or criticizing any one company, because they really do a good job of handling these files in their environment. Where typically you see the problems is if you're going from one manufacturer software or output devices to another's manufacturer's software and output is where you find problems. Where I'm just going to use two examples. It's, and I'm not using these to be anything other than an example. If I built my project in Codex Printergy and I want to send it over to ESCO to have it output for Flexo, there could be some interpretations between the way Kodak described my spot colors in the PDF that ESCO doesn't use in their output device for making a Flexo plate. So that's where these test suites come into a great help, where you can devise a file and run it through each of these manufacturers' tools to see if you're going to get what you hope you were going to get. So again, spot colors are probably the most type of output that has the potential for problems. Not that the problems can't be solved. People are doing this all day long. There's millions of files produced every day that have spot colors in them. So again, but the settings up front and the time up front will pay huge dividends if you don't leave it to chance. So that's where the test suite really comes in to help you.
And one of the other things you should know is that the output suite can be used within your workflow almost anywhere, which means you can actually even bring these into applications and see what happens by importing the test suite into an application like an InDesign or a Quark or something like that, or even into Photoshop. And then you begin to see where some of those settings that we were talking about before actually can play havoc in a workflow. So these documents were put together by a lot of it was put together by Stefan Yagi from Switzerland, but with the help of a lot of other Ghent Workgroup members, and he put them together. We put them, they created as individuals, put them together in these sheets to make it easier for people. So they're multiple page documents that you can download. Here's another one.
Yeah, so this, again, these are designed. When you go to this page, and you'll see at the end we have some reference materials where you can go find a lot of what we're talking about here. But it really is good for testing a lot of your special overprints like Cmyk versus RGB. If you're one of those people that likes to use RGB because of its expanded color gamut, and you want to have the widest color gamut that you possibly can have until you hit the print button, this will test those workflows for you. Make sure you've got the right overprint settings, the right ICC color spaces, whether you're using Fogra, now called Fogra 51, or Grackle, or or Swap, or any of those ones like that. It'll actually tell you whether your settings are going to produce what you want. So the CMS is just another way of describing my color management system. That's what CMS stands for. So it's just an easy way of making sure that what you say you want comes out on the other end.
Absolutely.
So we talked about a lot of stuff here. So Dave and I were very conscious about the things that we put in this presentation. There is backup supporting reference material that you can go back and read if you want to get into more of the details. So the following slides are just a list of the documents that we used besides our industry experience to quote stuff that you can then go look, and these are all available on the Ghent Work site, Ghent Workgroup site.
Absolutely, gwg.org. And this PDFX workflow book is a classic. It really is, and it's not meant to be difficult. It's very visual, and can help you define the best way to work with PDFX. This is an amazing white paper on transparency best practices. Some of the stuff that Steve went over, but in greater detail, and a wonderful white paper. A whole white paper on output intents. This was actually put together by Martin Bailey from Global Graphics, who really gets into the nitty-gritty of output intents. So if you really want to get into the weeds on some of this stuff, this is good information for you, and it's all available. It's all free. It's all available on the Ghent Workgroup site, gwg.org. And of course, the Output Suite is in, right now we're on version 5 of the Output Suite. This is a classic piece of technology that people use. Manufacturers use this stuff for testing their workflows and their DFEs. This is something that's very easy, visual, as Steve just showed you, and it's something that you can just download and use at the site itself.